In the annals of American history, there are tales that stir the soul and ignite the imagination. One such story, shrouded in mystery and legend, takes us back to a time when New England groaned under the weight of oppression. It was 1689, and the colonies faced a crisis that would test their resolve and shape their future. James II, the successor of Charles, had annulled the charters of all the colonies. He sent a harsh and unprincipled soldier to strip away the liberties of the people and endanger their religion. This man was Sir Edmund Andros, and his administration lacked scarcely a single characteristic of tyranny. Picture, if you will, a government holding office from the king, wholly independent of the country it ruled. Laws were made and taxes levied without the consent of the people. The rights of private citizens were violated, and the titles of all landed property declared void. The voice of complaint was stifled by restrictions on the press. To make matters worse, the first band of mercenary troops ever to march on free soil now overawed any signs of disaffection. For 2 long years our ancestors were kept in sullen submission. Their allegiance to the mother country, which had once been a source of pride, now became a bitter pill to swallow. The colonists, who had long enjoyed more freedom than even the native subjects of Great Britain, found themselves under the heel of oppression. But hope, as it often does, came in the form of a whisper. A rumor reached the shores of New England that the Prince of Orange had ventured on an enterprise that, if successful, would be the triumph of civil and religious rights. It would be the salvation of New England. Yet this was but a doubtful whisper. It might be false, or the attempt might fail. In either case, the man who stirred against King James would lose his head. Despite the danger, the intelligence produced a marked effect. The people smiled mysteriously in the streets and threw bold glances at their oppressors. Far and wide, there was a subdued and silent agitation, as if the slightest signal would rouse the whole land from its sluggish despondency. Aware of the danger they faced, the rulers resolved to avert it with an imposing display of strength. Perhaps they thought to confirm their despotism by even harsher measures. And so, on an April afternoon in 1689, Sir Edmund Andros and his favorite counselors, warm with wine, assembled the red coats of the governor's guard and made their appearance in the streets of Boston. As the sun neared setting, the march commenced. The roll of the drum at that unquiet crisis seemed to go through the streets less as martial music and more as a muster call to the inhabitants themselves. A multitude assembled in King Street, the very place destined to be the scene, nearly a century later, of another encounter between the troops of Britain and a people struggling against her tyranny. The crowd that gathered showed the strong and somber features of their Puritan character. There was the sober garb, the general severity of mien, the gloomy but undismayed expression. Their speech was filled with scriptural forms, and they held an unshakable confidence in heaven's blessing on a righteous cause. Among the crowd were old soldiers of the Parliament, smiling grimly at the thought that their aged arms might strike another blow against the House of Stuart. Veterans of King Philip's War stood shoulder to shoulder with ministers scattered throughout the throng. These holy men exerted their influence to quiet the people, but not to disperse them. As tension mounted, wild rumors began to circulate. Some cried that Satan would strike his masterstroke, that all the godly pastors were to be dragged to prison. Others feared a new St. Bartholomew's massacre. The wiser class believed the governor's object somewhat less atrocious, but no less threatening to their liberty. It was in this charged atmosphere that the sound of marching feet and beating drums grew ever closer. The crowd's attention was drawn to the sight of a double rank of soldiers, occupying the whole breadth of the street. They marched with shouldered matchlocks and burning matches, presenting a row of fires in the gathering dusk. Behind this imposing display rode a party of mounted gentlemen. At their center was Sir Edmund Andros himself, elderly but erect and soldier-like. Around him were his favorite counselors, the bitterest foes of New England. Edward Randolph, their archenemy, rode at his right hand. On the other side was Bullivant, scattering jests and mockery as he rode along. But the figure that most attracted the public eye and stirred up the deepest feeling was the Episcopal clergyman of King's Chapel. He rode haughtily among the magistrates in his priestly vestments, a fitting representative of prelacy and persecution, the union of church and state, and all those abominations that had driven the Puritans to the wilderness. As this procession advanced, the crowd found itself pushed back, huddled together at the extremity of the street. The soldiers had advanced no more than a third of its length, leaving an empty space between the two groups. It was into this paved solitude that a remarkable personage suddenly appeared. The figure of an ancient man seemed to emerge from among the people. He walked by himself along the center of the street, moving to confront the armed band. His attire was striking. The old Puritan dress, a dark cloak, and a steeple-crowned hat, in a fashion at least 50 years out of date. A heavy sword hung at his thigh, but he carried a staff in his hand to assist the tremulous gait of age. As this gray patriarch turned to face the crowd, he displayed a face of antique majesty, made doubly venerable by the hoary beard that descended on his breast. With a gesture of both encouragement and warning, he turned again and resumed his way towards the advancing troops. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who is this gray patriarch?" the young asked their elders. But none could make reply. Even the oldest among them, those of 80 years and upward, were disturbed by their inability to recognize one of such evident authority. As the venerable stranger drew near the advancing soldiers, a transformation seemed to come over him. The decrepitude of age fell from his shoulders, leaving him in gray but unbroken dignity. He marched onward with a warrior's step, keeping time to the military music. When scarcely 20 yards remained between him and the soldiers, the old man grasped his staff by the middle and held it before him like a leader's truncheon. In a voice that rang with authority, he cried out a single word, "Stand!" The effect was immediate and profound. At the old man's word and outstretched arm, the roll of the drum was hushed, and the advancing line stood still. A tremulous enthusiasm seized upon the multitude. They raised a shout of awe and exultation, looking to this gray champion for the deliverance of New England. Confused and taken aback, the governor and his party rode hastily forward. It seemed for a moment they might press their snorting and affrighted horses right against the hoary apparition. But the old man did not flinch. His severe eye glanced round the group before settling sternly on Sir Edmund Andros. In that moment it seemed as though this dark old man was the true ruler, and that the governor, council, and soldiers representing the Crown's authority had no choice but to obey. Edward Randolph, ever the firebrand, cried out fiercely, "What does this old fellow here? Onward, Sir Edmund, bid the soldiers forward and give the dotard the same choice that you give all his countrymen, to stand aside or be trampled on." But Sir Edmund Andros, perhaps sensing the gravity of the moment, addressed the old man directly. "Are you mad, old man?" he demanded in loud and harsh tones. "How dare you stay the march of King James's governor?" The gray figure replied with stern composure, "I have stayed the march of a king himself ere now. I am here, Sir Governor, because the cry of an oppressed people hath disturbed me in my secret place." His words carried the weight of prophecy as he continued. "There is no longer a popish tyrant on the throne of England, and by tomorrow noon his name shall be a byword in this very street, where ye would make it a word of terror. Back, thou that wast a governor, back. With this night thy power is ended. Tomorrow the prison. Back, lest I foretell the scaffold." The people had been drawing nearer, drinking in the words of their champion. His voice, though speaking in accents long disused, stirred their souls. They confronted the soldiers, not wholly without arms, ready to convert the very stones of the street into deadly weapons if need be. Sir Edmund Andros looked from the old man to the multitude and back again. Whether overawed by the gray champion's look or perceiving his peril in the threatening attitude of the people, it is certain that he gave back and ordered his soldiers to commence a slow and guarded retreat. As the troops withdrew, the people thronged tumultuously in their rear. Some reported seeing Bradstreet, the aged governor, embrace a form more aged than his own. Others soberly affirmed that while they marveled at the venerable grandeur of his aspect, the old man had faded from their eyes, melting slowly into the hues of twilight, till where he stood there was an empty space. All agreed that the hoary shape was gone. The men of that generation watched for his reappearance in sunshine and in twilight, but never saw him more, nor knew when his funeral passed, nor where his gravestone was. The mystery of the gray champion's identity persisted. Some speculated that his name might be found in the records of that stern court of justice which passed a sentence too mighty for the age, but glorious in all after times, for its humbling lesson to the monarch and its high example to the subject. In the years that followed, whenever the descendants of the Puritans faced times of crisis and needed to show the spirit of their sires, it was said that the old man appeared again. 80 years later, he walked once more in King Street. 5 years after that, on an April morning, he stood on the green beside the meeting house at Lexington, where the first fallen of the Revolution would later be commemorated. And when the fathers of the nation toiled at the breastwork on Bunker's Hill, the old warrior was said to walk his rounds through the night. The legend of the Gray Champion became a symbol of New England's hereditary spirit. His shadowy march on the eve of danger served as a pledge that New England's sons would always rise to vindicate their ancestry. In times of darkness, adversity, and peril, the people looked to the memory of this mysterious guardian, hoping that should domestic tyranny oppress them or an invader's step pollute their soil, the Gray Champion would come again. The tale of the Gray Champion reminds us that the spirit of liberty, once kindled, can never truly be extinguished. It lives on in the hearts of the people, ready to manifest in times of greatest need. As we reflect on this legend, we are called to remember the courage of those who came before us and to stand ready to defend the freedoms they fought so hard to secure. In the words attributed to the Gray Champion himself, "I have stayed the march of a king himself ere now." May we all find such courage within ourselves when liberty is threatened, and may we never forget the power of a people united in the cause of freedom.